I gave my parents a luxury trip to Europe. When I picked them up at the airport, they told me they decided to go with my unemployed sister instead of me. You're running behind, Mom said, stepping onto the porch, her suitcase trailing behind her. I quickly checked the time on my dashboard. It read 6:02 a.m. Just 2 minutes late. Mom, I said, forcing a grin. I hopped out of the car to help with the bags, but then I saw her, my sister, Sarah, walking out of the house, her own luggage in hand. My grin faltered. What's going on? I asked, trying to sound calm. Mom turned to me, her face way too cheerful considering the situation. Oh, Zoe, we decided Sarah should come with us instead of you. She's been so stressed lately, and she really needs this getaway. My heart tightened. Instead of me? Mom, I've been planning this for ages. I've already covered everything. She waved her hand like it was nothing. We're grateful, sweetheart, but you're always so busy. You could take another trip whenever. Sarah really needs this now. Sarah didn't even look sorry. She just smirked and shifted her weight, leaning to one side. Thanks for understanding, Zoe, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I stood there, staring at both of them, my chest tightening with frustration. My dad appeared a moment later, handing me his suitcase, avoiding my gaze. This is unbelievable, I muttered, my voice trembling. This was supposed to be a trip for me, something to enjoy with you. Mom smiled brightly. It still is, sweetheart, just with Sarah instead of you. Don't make a big deal out of it. Sarah needs this break more than you do right now. My name is Zoe, and for the past couple of years, I've been working overtime, saving every penny I could, just so I could give my parents the perfect vacation, flights, luxury accommodations, personalized tours. I arranged every little detail, down to the dinner reservations. But as I stood there in the driveway, watching Sarah climb into the back seat of my car, I finally realized something I've been avoiding for so long. No matter how much effort I put in, Sarah would always be the priority. I gritted my teeth, holding back the words I wanted to shout. Instead, I forced a stiff smile and opened the trunk. Let's go then, I said, my voice flat. If they wanted to take Sarah instead of me, fine. But they weren't going to enjoy this trip in the way I had planned. The drive to the airport was suffocatingly quiet, except for Sarah's constant rambling. Oh my God, Mom, did you see the TikTok about Paris? I'm so excited to shop there. Do you think we'll have time for shopping, or will the tours fill up the whole day? My grip tightened on the steering wheel as I stared ahead, trying to stay composed. Mom chuckled softly. Of course we'll have time. We'll sort it out when we get there. When we get there, I repeated to myself. It stung that they didn't even seem to realize I wasn't part of that we anymore. At one point, my dad cleared his throat. Thanks for driving us, Zoe. I know this is probably a bit unusual. I glanced at him through the rearview mirror. Unusual? That's one way to put it, I said, my voice cold. He didn't answer, shifting awkwardly in his seat, clearly regretting his words. Sarah piped up from the back seat, her voice too sweet. You're not upset, right? I mean, this is huge, letting me go on this trip. I could never have afforded this by myself. I clenched my jaw, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Of course, Sarah. Have a great time. By the time we arrived at the airport drop-off area, I was beyond frustrated. I helped unload their bags, and Mom pulled me into a hug. Thank you for being so understanding, honey. This really means a lot to us and to Sarah. I nodded stiffly, forcing out a tight "Sure, Mom." Sarah flashed a wide grin as she rolled her suitcase toward the entrance. Thanks, Zoe. You're the best. I stood there, watching them disappear into the terminal, my chest tight with a mix of anger and hurt. The drive back home felt like a blur, my mind replaying the conversation over and over. This really means a lot to Sarah. You're not upset, right? You're always so busy. I parked in the driveway and sat in the car for a few moments, my knuckles white from gripping the wheel so tightly. Then, without hesitation, I marched into the house, grabbed my laptop, and logged into every account I had used to plan their trip, canceling hotel reservations, refunding tour payments, undoing flight upgrades. Nope. I stared at the confirmation emails filling up my inbox, the tightness in my chest finally starting to loosen. They wanted to take Sarah instead of me? Fine. But they wouldn't be staying in five-star hotels or experiencing the trip I had meticulously planned. Private tours, all arranged at my expense. When I finally closed my laptop, a strange sense of satisfaction washed over me. They could deal with the fallout in Paris. I was done being the family doormat. The phone call came as soon as their flight landed. My phone buzzed relentlessly while I unpacked the suitcase I had packed so carefully for a trip that wasn't mine anymore. The irony wasn't lost on me. I hung my dresses in the closet, neatly placed my shoes back on the shelf. The buzzing continued, filling the room with its annoying, persistent vibration. I sighed, grabbing the phone and glancing at the screen. My mom's name was flashing, with several missed calls and texts. I unlocked the phone and scrolled through the messages. "Violet, what's going on? The hotel won't let us check in. The reservation is missing. Call me immediately. Violet, this isn't funny. Fix this now." A laugh bubbled out before I could stop it. Fix this? They seriously thought I'd swoop in and save the day after everything they'd done? The phone buzzed again. This time, it was Lauren calling. I let it ring, only for her to leave a voicemail. "Violet, this is so petty," she snapped, her voice dripping with entitlement. "We're stuck here because of you. You need to call the hotel and fix it now." I rolled my eyes and deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. For years, I had been their fixer, the one who patched up every mistake, who picked up every slack. But not anymore. Finally, I answered, if only to stop the constant barrage of calls. My mom's voice hit me like a tidal wave of anger as soon as I picked up. "Violet, what did you do?" "The hotel says the reservation was canceled, and none of the tours are booked anymore." I let her rant for a moment, calmly replying, "I canceled them." There was a long, stunned silence before she hissed, "Why would you do that?" "Oh, I don't know," I said, my tone thick with sarcasm. "Maybe because you decided to take Lauren on my trip instead of me? You're lucky I even drove you to the airport." "We thought you'd understand," she snapped. "Understand what?" I asked, my voice rising with frustration. That years of saving and planning meant nothing because Lauren needed a break? That my hard work wasn't worth anything to you? Guess what, Mom? I didn't understand. And frankly, I didn't care to. I hung up before she could say anything else, turning off my phone and tossing it onto the couch. The silence that followed felt almost blissful. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe. If they wanted to prioritize Lauren, fine. But they could sort out the rest of their trip without me. That blissful silence lasted exactly one day. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing again with a storm of calls and messages. At first, I ignored them. I spent the day cleaning the house, catching up on work, and letting the quiet settle. But by evening, curiosity got the better of me. I opened my phone and braced myself for the storm. "Violet, you've gone too far. Your sister is in tears, and your dad is furious. We can't get into any of the hotels you booked for us." From Lauren, "You're acting like a child. I don't get why you're making this such a big deal. Just fix it already." And from my dad, "We need to talk. This isn't right." I set the phone down with a shake of my head. For years, I had been the one to fix everything, making sure everyone was comfortable and happy. Now that I'd taken a step back, they had no idea how to handle it. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat down at the kitchen table, letting the anger simmer. How dare they expect me to clean up their mess? How dare they act like I was the one in the wrong? The phone rang again just minutes later. This time, I answered. "Violet," my mom barked before I could even say anything. "This isn't funny anymore. We're stranded here. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is?" I took a slow sip of my tea, letting the bitterness of the moment settle in. Embarrassing? You think this is embarrassing? Try saving for years, planning every detail of a trip, only to be told you're not even part of it. Not anymore. "Stop being dramatic," she snapped. "Lauren needed this more than you." "Then let her figure it out," I said firmly. "You made your decision, Mom. You wanted to take Lauren instead of me. Fine, but don't expect me to pay for her vacation." "We're family," she hissed. I let out a bitter laugh. Funny, I was just thinking the same thing. In the background, I could hear Lauren's whiny voice. "Mom, just hang up on her. She's being impossible." That was it. The final straw. "Enjoy your trip," I said coldly, hanging up. I stared at my phone, the finality of the words sinking in. The silence that followed was deafening. I was done. His voice softened now. I paused, letting his words hang in the air before responding. Then what did you mean, Dad? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He sighed again, clearly frustrated. Look, Violet, we didn't handle things the right way, I know that. But you can't just cut us off like this. We're family. The word family felt like a slap. I'd spent my entire life being expected to uphold that sacred bond, to always make sacrifices for them, to always put their needs before mine. And for what? To be left behind when it really mattered? I had done everything right. Always the reliable one. Always the one who showed up when no one else did. And yet, when I needed the same from them, they had made their choice. Family, I repeated, the bitterness creeping into my voice. You don't get to throw that word at me now. You've always expected me to take care of everything, to just let you walk all over me without any consideration for what I needed. So don't stand there and act like I'm the one who's wrong for finally putting myself first. There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, my dad spoke, his voice quieter. I didn't mean to make you feel like that, Violet. But it's not just about the trip. Your mom and Lauren, they're upset because they don't understand why you do this. I don't understand either, to be honest. You want to understand? I snapped, feeling the anger rise again. It's because I've spent my whole life doing everything for you both, for Lauren, for everyone else. And now, when I finally choose me, when I stop playing the role of the doormat, you act like I'm the problem? My dad fell silent. I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head, but he didn't have an answer. He never did when it came to the truth. The uncomfortable truth that he, my mom, and Lauren were the ones who had taken advantage of me, over and over again. Look, my dad said finally, his voice quieter now, almost pleading we're still family. We're not trying to hurt you, Violet. But I think you're overreacting. Overreacting? I repeated, my voice rising again. This isn't about a stupid trip, Dad. This is about years of being overlooked and treated like I didn't matter. And now you want me to just fix everything and pretend like nothing happened? The call ended with more silence. But this time, it wasn't as oppressive as it had been in the past. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of control, like I was calling the shots in my own life, instead of letting them dictate everything. The next few days passed in a blur. I worked, I focused on myself, and I avoided the constant barrage of calls and messages. I felt no guilt, no desire to make amends. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. But then, one evening, after I had finished dinner and was winding down for the night, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message from my mom. I'm sorry, it said. I don't know how we got here, but I miss you. Please come back. I stared at the message for a long moment. It was a good apology, but it felt hollow. Too little, too late. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. But I knew one thing for sure. I was done being their fixer. Done being the one who bent over backwards for people who never appreciated it. It was my turn to live for me that had underestimated me, and it felt good. For the first time in a long time, I was proud of myself. I sat back, letting the warmth of the tea fill me as I reflected on the whirlwind of emotions from the past few days. I had spent so long being the person they could count on, the one who cleaned up their messes, who fixed their problems. But now, I was the one taking control of my own life. No more being the afterthought. No more being the one who always gave, only to be met with nothing in return. My phone buzzed, breaking my thoughts. I glanced at the screen, but I didn't pick it up. It was a message from my mom. No doubt another plea for me to come to my senses, to make things right. I didn't need to read it to know what it would say. It was the same song and dance I had heard for years. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the quiet street. It felt surreal to be alone in my own space, free from the constant pressure and expectations of my family. I had finally drawn a line in the sand, and they hadn't crossed it. They had bulldozed right over it, expecting me to just take it. But I was done with that. The next few days passed by in a blur of work and small, personal victories. I spent time catching up on things I had put off, rediscovered hobbies I had forgotten, and felt the weight lifting off my shoulders as I finally started living for myself. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of doubt, but I was learning how to be okay with that. Learning how to breathe again without feeling like I was suffocating under their expectations. Then, just as I was starting to settle into this new rhythm, the doorbell rang. I opened it cautiously, half expecting it to be my parents or Lauren, but it wasn't. It was Grace, holding a box in her hands, a smile on her face. "I brought you something," she said, stepping into the house without waiting for an invitation. I raised an eyebrow, curious. "What's in the box?" "You'll see." She set it down on the kitchen counter, and I noticed the way she was looking at me, like she was proud of me. It made me smile. "I know it's been a rough few days, but you did the right thing, Violet. You stood up for yourself." I smiled back, grateful for her support. "Thanks, Grace. I think I'm starting to realize that." She opened the box, revealing a collection of books and journals. "I thought you might need some inspiration to keep this new mindset going," she said, her eyes glinting with mischief, "and some space to keep writing your own story." I laughed softly, feeling the weight of everything I had just experienced, everything I was finally letting go of, lighten just a little bit more. "You're the best," I said, my voice full of warmth. She shrugged with a grin. "It's about time you started living for you. Don't let anyone tell you how to write your story." I nodded, my heart full of gratitude. She was right. It was time I stopped letting others dictate how my life should go. From now on, it was my turn, my story, and I was finally ready to write it. Less accusatory words. They apologized for the way they treated me and asked if we could talk things through. But I didn't feel the urgency to respond. Instead, I let the message sit there for a while, weighing my options. A part of me wanted to pick up the phone and tell them everything, how much their rejection had hurt, how I had been suffocating under their expectations. But another part of me knew that my silence was more powerful than any words I could say. I didn't need to explain myself to them anymore. I'd spent years justifying my choices and trying to make them see me. But now it was different. I had made the decision to live for myself, and that was enough. I spent the following days back at home in the rhythm I had begun to embrace during my trip. Quiet mornings with coffee, evenings spent reading or journaling, weekends filled with activities I loved. It felt like I was rebuilding my life from the ground up, only this time it was with a foundation built on my own wants and needs. Grace continued to be my sounding board, offering advice or just listening when I needed it. We talked about everything, my family, my future, the small business ideas I'd been toying with. For the first time, I wasn't worried about disappointing anyone. My dreams were mine, and they would happen on my terms. A few weeks later, as I was walking through a park, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from my dad. "Can we talk? I think we need to clear the air." I stared at the message for a long moment. The old part of me would have rushed to respond, to fix things, to try to repair the broken pieces. But now, I wasn't sure I even wanted that anymore. My life was moving forward, and I was finally at peace with who I was. I decided not to respond right away. I wanted to think about it, and for the first time, the decision felt entirely mine to make. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. As the days passed, I continued to enjoy my new life. I was taking more time for myself, finally letting go of the guilt that had always hung over me. I started doing things just for the joy of doing them, without worrying about whether anyone else approved. I was becoming the person I had always been meant to be, a person who wasn't afraid to put herself first. The phone never rang again from my parents. But in the end, it didn't matter. I had moved on, not in anger, but in strength. It wasn't just about letting go of them. It was about letting go of the part of me that had always been afraid of being alone. I had found a freedom I never knew I needed, and I was finally living my own life for the first time ever. And that, more than anything, was the true reward. The phone buzzed again, but this time I didn't rush to check it. I had learned that waiting, taking a moment to breathe, gave me the clarity I needed. Another message from my mom, carefully worded, of course. "Hope you had a nice trip." It was a start, a sign that maybe they were trying to make amends. But I couldn't ignore the years of built-up resentment and hurt. "Maybe we can all talk soon," it continued. I stared at the screen for a moment, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, then set my phone down. I wasn't ready to reply, and that was okay. This time, it was on my terms. No more rushing to fix things for them. No more rushing to please anyone but myself. As I unpacked my suitcase and placed the small souvenirs I collected on my shelves, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, pride. I wasn't just unpacking memories. I was unpacking a new version of myself, one who had learned to live for her own happiness. A week after returning home, I received another call. It was from my mom. This time I picked up. "Hi, Violet," she said, her tone unusually soft, almost tentative. "How was your trip?" "It was amazing," I replied, keeping my voice neutral, but part of me couldn't help but feel the freedom in those words. "I had the time of my life." "That's good to hear," she responded, but there was a pause, like she was trying to choose her words carefully. "We've been thinking a lot about what happened. Maybe we handled things poorly." I wasn't ready to forgive them. Not yet. But the admission, however small, caught me off guard. "Poorly?" I repeated, the words falling from my lips before I could stop them. "You replaced me on a trip I planned and paid for without even asking." "Poorly is an understatement." "I know," she said quietly. "Your dad and I, we didn't realize how much it would hurt you and Lauren." I couldn't help but wonder, did Lauren really feel bad? Or was she still blaming me for ruining her vacation? Is she upset too? Or is she still blaming me for ruining her vacation? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, but there was a hint of frustration in it. "She's upset," my mom admitted, her voice carrying a weight I hadn't heard before. "But I think she knows she could have handled things better." I let out a slow sigh and leaned against the counter, crossing my arms as I stared out the window. "Mom, this wasn't just about the trip. It's about years of putting her first and expecting me to pick up the slack. I'm not doing that anymore." "I understand," she said softly after a long moment. "We're going to try to do better. We don't want to lose you." Her words hit me differently than I expected, stirring something deep inside. But I learned not to let guilt dictate my decisions anymore. I was no longer the person who bent herself in half just to keep the peace. "I'm glad to hear that," I said. "But it's going to take more than words to fix this. I need to see real effort, not just apologies." "You will," she promised. "We'll give you the space you need. But I hope you'll let us back in someday." After the call, I sat down, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Relief that they were finally acknowledging their behavior, and skepticism about whether they'd actually change. I knew it wasn't up to me to make that happen. That night, as I opened my journal, I realized something important. Whether or not they changed wasn't my responsibility anymore. I had let go of that weight, and it felt like the last piece of me that I had needed to reclaim. Over the next few months, I kept my boundaries firm. I responded to their calls and texts when I felt like it, but I no longer made the effort to fix things or smooth over every little conflict. I stopped carrying the burden of their expectations. Instead, I focused on creating a life that was entirely mine. I signed up for a photography class, something I'd always dreamed of but never had the time for. I joined a local hiking group, and I even started planning my next solo trip. Each new step felt like another reclaiming of a part of me that had been lost for far too long. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I realized how far I'd come. I wasn't the person who bent over backward for people who didn't appreciate me. I wasn't the person who scrambled to fix things at the expense of my own happiness. I was someone who valued herself, who set boundaries, who wasn't afraid to stand up for what she deserved. And in that moment, I felt truly free.